My son was standing in front of me with the documents in his hand. He waved them near my face as if they were the final proof of his victory. His gaze was fixed on this house downtown, the house I inherited so many years ago, long before he was born. Samantha, my daughter-in-law, had already arrived with her things, ready to move in. She had left them by the door, as if everything was already decided. As if my opinion didn't matter. As if I were just an obstacle they had to remove to take what they believed was theirs. But as soon as the judge spoke in that courtroom, my son froze. He was speechless. And everything he had planned with such arrogance fell apart right in front of his eyes. My name is Eleanor Davis, and I am 69 years old. My whole life, I've learned that people show their true faces when they believe they have power in their hands. And that Tuesday afternoon, when Mark walked through my front door, I understood that my own son had become someone unrecognizable. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the table after lunch, when I heard his firm steps crossing the living room. He didn't knock. He didn't say hello. He just walked in as if this place already belonged to him completely. He dropped a file folder on the dining room table with a sharp thud. The sound echoed through the house. I stood still, the dish towel still in my hands, watching him from the doorway. Mark is 43 years old. He's my only child. I raised him alone after his father passed away when he was just 12 years old. I worked as hard as I could to give him an education, clothes, food. I sacrificed my own dreams so he could go to college and have a better life than mine. But the man standing in front of me that day wasn't the boy I once held. He was someone different. Someone with hard eyes and a mouth pressed into a cold, thin line. He opened the folder without looking at me. He pulled out several papers and spread them on the table, as if he were closing a business deal. "Mom, I need you to sign this today. We can't wait any longer." His voice was firm, authoritative. There was no doubt or hesitation. He spoke as if I were an employee who had to follow orders. I approached slowly. I dried my hands on the towel and left it on the back of a chair. I looked at the papers without touching them. They were legal documents, property transfer forms. My house. The house where I had lived for over 40 years. The house I inherited from my parents when they passed away. "What is this, Mark?" It wasn't a question. It was a calm statement. I already knew what it was, but I wanted to hear him say it. "It's the transfer for the house. I'm entitled to half because I'm your heir. That's how the law works." "Mom, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just claiming what's mine." He spoke with such confidence that anyone would have believed he was right, but I remained silent. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply observed him with the same calm I had learned to maintain during all these years of being alone. Samantha appeared in the living room doorway at that moment. My daughter-in-law, a 38-year-old woman with her hair pulled back and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was carrying a large bag in each hand. Clothes, personal items, everything ready to move in. "We already talked about this, Eleanor. It's what's best for everyone. You don't need this much space." "We do. We have plans. We want to grow. This house is in a really good part of downtown. We can sell it, and we all win." She spoke as if I were an old woman with no judgment, as if my life and my decisions had no value. I didn't answer. I stood by the table, my hands crossed in front of me, looking at both of them in silence. That silence made them uncomfortable. I saw it in their faces. They expected yelling. They expected tears. They expected me to break. But I didn't. Mark sighed impatiently. He took a pen from his shirt pocket and placed it on the papers. "Sign here, Mom. Don't make this complicated. This is already decided." I spoke to a lawyer. "I have a legal right to half of this property. If you don't sign now, we'll have to go to court. And you'll lose time and money there. It's better to do this the easy way." His words sounded rehearsed, as if he had repeated them in front of a mirror, as if he had planned every detail of this conversation. Samantha nodded beside him. She dropped her bags on the floor and crossed her arms with a smug expression. "Eleanor, be reasonable. You're not young anymore. Living alone in a house this big doesn't make sense. We can take care of you, but we need you to cooperate. Take care of me." Those words echoed in my mind like a joke. It had been years since they had come to visit me. Years since they had asked how I was. And now they were talking about taking care of me. I still didn't respond. I took the pen Mark had left on the table. I looked at it for a moment. Then I placed it back on the papers without signing anything. I need time to think. My voice was soft, calm, no visible emotion, but firm. Mark clenched his jaw. His eyes darkened with frustration. There's nothing to think about, Mom. Either you sign today or we'll see you in court. And I promise you, you won't win there. The law is on my side. I'm your direct heir. I have a right to this property. Samantha moved closer. Her tone changed. It became harder. Don't be stubborn, Eleanor. This is going to happen anyway. If you do it now, at least you avoid problems. If you force us to go to trial, everything will get complicated. And you'll end up looking like the bad guy. The bad guy. Me, who had raised this man alone. Me, who had worked until I was exhausted so he could have a future. Me, who had never denied him anything. But I said none of that. There was no need. People who act out of greed don't listen to reason. They only hear what they want to hear. I turned and walked toward the kitchen. I left the papers on the table. I left Mark and Samantha standing in the living room with their plans and their arrogance. I heard Mark let out an angry sigh behind me. Fine, Mom. If you want to do this the hard way, we'll do it the hard way. But don't say I didn't warn you. They left the house, slamming the door. Silence returned. But this time, it was different. It was a silence filled with something they couldn't see. Something I had kept safe, and that would soon change everything. Because my son believed he had the law on his side. He believed this house was his by right. He believed I was a naive old woman who would give in to his pressure. But he didn't know something fundamental. Something I had kept quiet about all these years. And when the time came to reveal it, his entire world was going to collapse before his eyes. The days that followed were strange. Mark didn't come back right away, but I knew he was planning his next move. I knew him too well. When he got something in his head, he didn't rest until he got it. And this time, what he wanted was my house. I continued with my routine as always. I got up early, made my coffee, watered the plants in the yard, cleaned the rooms. This house was big for one person. That was true. But it was mine. Every corner held memories. Every wall had a story. I had inherited it from my parents when they passed away. That was over 40 years ago. Long before I married Mark's father. Long before my son was born. This property was always mine. Only mine. But Mark didn't know that. Or maybe he knew and chose to ignore it. To him, I was his mother. And everything I had should be his too. His logic was that simple. On Thursday morning, 3 days after his first visit, he showed up again. This time he brought Samantha with him. They walked in without knocking. Just like before. I was in the dining room, folding clean laundry, when I heard their voices in the living room. Mom, we need to talk. Mark's voice sounded more controlled than last time. More calculated. He had rehearsed what he was going to say. I took my time. I finished folding the last shirt, placed it on the pile, and walked to the living room. They were standing by the sofa. Mark had another folder in his hands. Samantha was looking at him with a smile that tried to be kind but only showed impatience. Good morning. My greeting was simple. Neutral. Emotionless. Mark nodded slightly. He opened the folder and took out more papers. He spread them on the coffee table as if presenting a business project. I spoke with my lawyer. Mom, he confirmed what I already told you. As the only child, I have a right to half of your assets. That includes this house. I'm not making this up. It's the law. If you don't want to sign, we'll have to go to court. And believe me, the judge will decide the same thing. We're better off avoiding that whole process. He spoke with such certainty that anyone would have thought he was a legal expert. But I knew the truth. I knew he had only consulted enough to convince himself he was right. He hadn't researched thoroughly. He hadn't asked the right questions. Samantha sat on the sofa and crossed her legs. She looked around the living room as if she were already measuring the spaces for her own furniture. Eleanor, I understand this is hard for you. But think about it. We can give you a good life. We'll sell this house, and everyone benefits from the money. You can rent a smaller, more comfortable apartment. You won't have to worry about maintaining such a big place. And we can finally move forward with our plans. Her words sounded rehearsed, too, as if they had practiced together what they were going to say to me. As if I were an obstacle in a business negotiation, I sat in the armchair across from them. I folded my hands in my lap and watched them in silence. That silence made them uncomfortable. I saw it in their gestures, in the way Mark drummed his fingers on the folder, in the way Samantha nervously bounced her foot. "How much do you think the house is worth?" My question took them by surprise. Mark blinked. Samantha sat up straight. "Well, we made some inquiries. A property like this, downtown, could be worth between $150,000 and $200,000. It depends on the market, but it's a good amount, Mom. We can do a lot with that." Mark was speaking with enthusiasm now. His eyes shone as he mentioned the money. It was as if he already had it in his hands. "And what would you do with my share?" Another calm question. No accusations, just apparent curiosity. Samantha leaned forward. Her tone became softer, more manipulative. "Eleanor, you would get your share. Of course. $75,000 is enough for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You could rent a nice place, buy whatever you need, even travel if you want. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." $75,000. Half of what they estimated my house was worth. My house? The one I had inherited. The one I had maintained for decades. The one I had cared for with my own hands. "And what would you do with your share?" Mark settled into the sofa. His posture was more relaxed now. He thought I was giving in. "We have plans, Mom. We want to invest. Open a business. Maybe buy another property in a better area. Samantha and I have been waiting for an opportunity like this for years. And this house is that opportunity. An opportunity." That's what they called stripping me of what was mine. An opportunity. Samantha nodded eagerly. "Exactly. And it's not just for us, Eleanor. We're also thinking about the future. We want to have children someday. We need financial stability for that. This house would give us the boost we need. Children." They were talking about having children while planning to leave me homeless. The irony was almost painful. I continued to show no emotion. I didn't argue. I didn't object. I just listened. And as they spoke, I watched. I watched how they looked at each other with complicity. I watched how they had already decided everything without really consulting me. Mark took a pen from his pocket and placed it on the papers again. "Mom, I know this is hard, but it's for the best. Sign today, and we'll start the process tomorrow. In a few months, it will all be done. You'll see it was the right decision." His tone was almost paternal now, as if he were the responsible adult and I were the child who needed guidance. I looked at the pen. Then I looked at the papers. Then I looked at my son. At this man who was once a little boy who cried in my arms when he had nightmares. At that boy who told me he loved me before bed. At that boy who promised to take care of me when he grew up. Where had that boy gone when he became this? I need to consult with someone before I sign. My voice remained calm, firm but soft. Mark frowned. "Consult with whom, Mom? I already told you I spoke to a lawyer. He confirmed everything. You don't need to consult with anyone else." "Even so, I want to. It's my right." The word right echoed in the room. Mark clenched his jaw. Samantha stopped smiling. "Fine. Consult with whoever you want. But don't take too long. We've already wasted too much time on this." They stood up. Mark picked up the folder with a brusque gesture. Samantha grabbed her purse and looked at me with a mix of frustration and disdain. "We hope you'll be reasonable, Eleanor. We don't want to have to do this the legal way. But if you leave us no other choice, we will." They left the house without saying goodbye. The door slammed again. And again, I was left alone in the silence of my home. But this time, that silence didn't scare me. On the contrary, it gave me clarity. It gave me strength. Because I knew something they ignored. And that knowledge was my shield. That same afternoon, I called Carol. Carol had been my neighbor for 15 years. A 64-year-old woman who had worked her whole life in law offices. She understood laws. She knew how these things worked. We agreed to meet the next day at her house. I brought all the documents I had saved. The inheritance papers from my parents, the property deeds, Everything that proved this house was mine long before I got married. Carol reviewed every document carefully. She read every line, every date, every signature. And when she finished, she looked up at me with a serious but reassuring expression. "Eleanor, your son is completely wrong. This house is yours. Only yours. You inherited it before you got married. That means it's not part of the marital property. Your husband never had any right to it, and your son doesn't have any right to it now. He can't claim anything." Her words were a relief. Even though I already knew it deep down, hearing it from someone who understood the law gave me renewed certainty. What should I do then? Carol took my hand. "Don't sign anything. If he insists on taking you to court, go. Bring these documents. Any judge will see the truth immediately. Your son is going to lose, and he's going to be exposed in front of everyone." I nodded slowly. I put the papers back in my bag and said goodbye to Carol with a hug. I returned to my house with a lighter heart, with the certainty that what was coming wouldn't scare me. Because Mark believed he had the power. He believed he was right. He believed I was a weak old woman who would cave to his pressure, but he was about to find out he was very wrong. A week after my conversation with Carol, Mark showed up again. This time, he didn't come alone with Samantha. He also brought a man he introduced as his lawyer, a guy in his 50s. Gray suit, leather briefcase, and an expression of superiority that bothered me from the first moment. The three of them entered my living room as if it were an office. I was preparing dinner when I heard their voices. I turned off the stove, wiped my hands, and went out to greet them with the same calm as always. "Mom, this is Mr. Harrison. He's going to explain everything so you understand we're not making anything up." Mark spoke with that fake tone of authority he had adopted lately, as if having a lawyer by his side gave him more power. Mr. Harrison extended his hand. I shook it briefly and invited them to sit. They settled on the sofa. I sat across from them in my usual armchair. "Mrs. Davis, your son hired me to advise him on this matter, and I must tell you, he is correct. According to the Civil Code, children have the right to inherit their parents' assets. In this case, as the only child, Mark has a right to half of this property. It's established by law." The lawyer spoke with that professional confidence that intimidates many people. But I looked him directly in the eyes without blinking. "I inherited this house from my parents before I got married. It is not marital property." My response was direct, no beating around the bush. Mr. Harrison blinked. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That's something we would have to verify, ma'am. But regardless, you are still Mark's mother, and he is your direct heir. Eventually, this property will be his. Eventually. That word hung in the air like a veiled threat, as if they were waiting for me to die to take what was mine. Samantha leaned forward. Her voice tried to sound sweet, but there was venom underneath. "Eleanor, no one is saying it isn't your house. But you have to think about the future. What's going to happen when you're gone? All of this will be Mark's anyway. Why not make things easier now? We all win. You get money to live comfortably, and we can start our lives." There was something in the way she spoke that turned my stomach. That way of planning my death as if it were a pending errand. As if my existence were just a temporary inconvenience. Mark cleared his throat. "Mom, Mr. Harrison can start the legal process if you don't cooperate. We can go to court and resolve this formally. But it's going to be more expensive, more complicated, and the result will be the same. We're better off doing this the easy way." The lawyer nodded gravely. "That's right, Mrs. Davis. A trial can take months. You'll have to pay legal fees. You'll have to appear before a judge. It will be draining for you. My professional recommendation is that you sign the transfer documents. It's the most sensible thing to do. The most sensible thing." As if giving up my home were sensible and not dispossession. I remained silent for a moment. I looked at the three of them. Mark, with that mix of impatience and greed in his eyes. Samantha, with her fake smile and ambitious plans. The lawyer, with his rehearsed speech and his air of bought authority. "I am not signing anything." My voice was quiet but firm. Like a rock that doesn't move, Mark stood up abruptly. "Then we'll see you in court. Mom, I warned you. You can do this the easy way or the hard way. You decide. Mr. Harrison put his papers back in his briefcase with professional calm. Mrs. Davis, I'm sorry you've made this decision. We will initiate the legal proceedings. You will receive a notification in the coming days. I recommend you seek legal representation as well. The three of them stood up. Mark looked at me with a mix of disappointment and contained anger. I hope this is worth it, Mom. Because in the end, you're going to lose anyway. They left my house, leaving a tense atmosphere. I stayed seated in my armchair, looking at the closed door. But I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel doubt. I felt a strange clarity, a certainty that what was coming was necessary. That night I called Carol again. I told her what had happened. She listened to everything attentively and then gave me clear advice. Eleanor, you need a lawyer too. You can't go to that courthouse alone. I know someone good, someone honest who won't overcharge you. His name is Arthur Jenkins. I worked with him years ago. He's trustworthy. The next day I went to Mr. Arthur Jenkins's office. It was a simple place, no luxuries, on the second floor of a downtown building. He received me kindly. He was a man in his 60s, gray hair, reading glasses hanging from his neck. I explained the whole situation. I showed him the inheritance documents, the property deeds. Everything that proved the house was mine before the marriage. Arthur Jenkins reviewed every paper carefully. He took notes. He asked questions. And when he finished, he leaned back in his chair with a reassuring smile. Mrs. Davis, your case is very clear. This property is yours. You inherited it before you got married. It is not marital property. Your son has no legal right to it while you are alive. And when you pass away, he will be an heir. Yes, but right now he cannot claim anything. Your son's lawyer is wrong, or he's lying to collect fees. His words gave me a deep peace, a confirmation of what I already knew but needed to hear from an expert. What do I have to do? Nothing but wait for the court notification. When it arrives, we will respond. We will present these documents, and the judge will dismiss the case immediately. Your son is going to lose, and he's going to be exposed. I thanked Mr. Jenkins and left his office with a lighter heart. I went back to my house and continued with my life as always, cooking, cleaning, watering the plants, waiting. Meanwhile, Mark and Samantha continued with their plans. I knew because Carol told me she had seen them walking around the neighborhood with a real estate agent. They were getting appraisals. They were calculating prices. They were spending, in their minds, the money they believed was guaranteed. One afternoon, 2 weeks after the lawyer's visit, the official notification arrived. A large envelope with seals from the civil courthouse. I opened it calmly and read the contents. It was Mark's formal lawsuit. He was claiming his right to half the property. He was requesting that a judge order the division or sale of the property. I took the document to Mr. Jenkins. He read it and prepared the response. A simple but forceful response. We attached all the documents proving the house was mine through premarital inheritance, that it could not be claimed by anyone while I was alive. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, a Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning. Courtroom 4 of the civil courthouse. During those 3 weeks, Mark tried to contact me several times. Calls I didn't answer, messages I didn't reply to. He even came to my house one more time. But I didn't open the door. There was nothing to talk about with him. Everything would be resolved in court. Samantha, for her part, had already started telling her friends that they would soon be moving to a house downtown, that they were going to sell the property and open a business, that they would finally have the life they deserved. I knew because one of her friends was Carol's cousin. Rumors travel fast in neighborhoods. Mark was so sure of his victory that he had even spoken with a realtor. He had calculated the house could sell for $180,000, $90,000 for each of them. With that, he and Samantha planned to buy a commercial space and open a clothing store. They had already visited several places. They had already run the numbers. All that certainty, all that arrogance, all that contempt for me. It was all about to come crashing down. The night before the hearing, I prepared my clothes carefully. A simple but dignified dress, comfortable shoes, my purse with all the documents well organized. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't scared. I was ready. Carol came to visit me that night. We had tea in the kitchen and talked about simple things. She squeezed my hand before she left. Tomorrow, everything is going to change, Eleanor. Your son is going to understand he made a very big mistake, and you are going to get your peace back. I nodded in silence. She was right. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the truth would come out. And tomorrow, Mark would discover that his mother was not the weak old woman he thought she was. The morning of the hearing dawned clear. I woke up early, as always. I made my coffee and sat by the kitchen window. I watched the sun light up the neighborhood streets as the world slowly woke up. There was a strange calm in me, a serenity that came from knowing the truth was on my side. I dressed carefully. The dress I had chosen was a soft cream color, simple but elegant. I pulled my hair back into a low bun and put on the pearl earrings my mother had given me so many years ago. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who had nothing to be ashamed of. A woman who had worked her whole life. A woman who deserved respect. Mr. Arthur Jenkins picked me up at 9 o'clock sharp. He arrived in his modest car and greeted me with a reassuring smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Davis. Are you ready?" "Yes, Mr. Jenkins. I'm ready." On the way to the courthouse, he reviewed the main points of the case with me. He explained how the procedure would go. The judge would first hear the arguments from Mark and his lawyer. Then she would hear ours. Afterward, she would review the documents and make a decision. "Don't worry. Everything is very clear. The documents speak for themselves. Your son has no legal basis for his lawsuit." I nodded in silence. I looked out the car window as the downtown streets passed before my eyes. This city had seen me grow up. It had seen me work. It had seen me raise my son alone after I was widowed. And now it would see me defend what was mine. We arrived at the courthouse 10 minutes before the scheduled time. It was an old, 3-story building with long hallways and dark wooden doors. The smell of old paper and dampness filled the air. There were people waiting on the benches in the hallway, some lawyers with their briefcases, some families with worried expressions. We went up to the second floor. Courtroom 4 was at the end of the hall. There was a wooden bench outside where we could wait. I sat down with my hands on my purse, breathing calmly. And then I saw them arrive. Mark and Samantha were walking down the hall with Mr. Harrison. All three were dressed formally. Mark was wearing a dark suit he had probably bought especially for this occasion. Samantha wore a fitted dress and high heels. They looked like they were going to a celebration rather than a hearing. When Mark saw me, his expression changed. There was something in his eyes, a mix of determination and something that almost looked like pity, but it hardened quickly. He approached, with Samantha and the lawyer behind him. "Good morning, Mom." His greeting was formal. Cold, as if I were a stranger. "Good morning." My response was just as neutral. There was no affection, no familiarity, just two people who were about to face a legal conflict. "You still have time to settle this out of court. We can talk to the judge and tell her we reached an agreement. We avoid this whole process." I shook my head gently. "No, Mark. Let's let the judge decide." He clenched his jaw. Samantha looked at me with disdain and clung to Mark's arm, as if showing her unconditional support. Mr. Harrison was reviewing some papers with a professional expression, oblivious to the family tension. Minutes later, the courtroom door opened. A clerk poked her head out. "Case of Davis versus Davis. You may enter." We all entered the courtroom. It was a large space with light-colored walls and a long bench at the front where the judge was sitting. A woman of about 55, short hair, rectangular glasses, and a serious but not hostile expression. She wore her judicial robe and had several documents in front of her. There were chairs for us on both sides of the room. Mark, Samantha, and their lawyer sat on the right. Mr. Jenkins and I sat on the left. The distance between us seemed much larger than just a few feet. The judge tapped her gavel lightly. "Good morning. I am Judge Wallace, and I will be handling this case. I have reviewed the lawsuit filed by Mr. Mark Davis against Mrs. Eleanor Davis. We will proceed to hear the arguments from both parties. Mr. Harrison, you may begin." Mark's lawyer stood up. He cleared his throat and began his presentation with that professional tone I already knew. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Mark Davis, is the only son of Mrs. Eleanor Davis. According to the Civil Code, children have the right to inherit their parents' assets. In this case, we are talking about a property located downtown, valued at approximately $180,000. My client requests that his right to half of said property be recognized, either through the division of the property or through its sale and the equitable distribution of the proceeds. The judge listened attentively, taking occasional notes. Counselor, are you aware of when and how Mrs. Davis acquired this property? Well, Your Honor, we understand the property has been in Mrs. Davis's possession for many years. The specific details of the acquisition were not provided to my client. The judge raised an eyebrow. You did not investigate the origin of the property before filing this lawsuit? Mr. Harrison shifted uncomfortably. We proceeded from the premise that, being the mother, and he being the only son, an inheritance right exists. The judge stared at him for a moment before speaking. Counselor, does the right of inheritance apply after the owner passes away? Not before. But let's continue. Do you have anything else to add? The lawyer tried to regain his composure. Yes, Your Honor. My client also argues that Mrs. Davis is of advanced age and that living alone in such a large property poses risks to her safety and well-being. We believe that a solution where she receives her financial share and can live in a more suitable place would be beneficial for everyone. I heard those words and felt a pang of indignation. They were using my age as an argument, as if being 69 made me incapable of deciding about my own life. The judge took more notes. Then she looked toward our table. Mr. Jenkins, you may present your defense. Arthur Jenkins stood up calmly. He opened his briefcase and took out the documents we had prepared. Your Honor, the defense is very simple and is supported by official documents. The property in question was inherited by Mrs. Eleanor Davis from her parents in the year 1982. This occurred 3 years before she married Mr. Mark Davis's father. Therefore, this property is the separate property of Mrs. Davis. It is not marital property, it is not part of any conjugal estate, and Mr. Mark Davis has no right to it while his mother is alive. The silence that followed was dense. I saw Mark stiffen in his chair, saw Samantha's eyes widen in surprise, saw Mr. Harrison turn pale. The judge held out her hand. May I see those documents, Mr.? Jenkins approached and handed her a folder. The judge began to review each paper attentively. The death certificates of my parents, the will where they left me the house, the property deed registered in my name, the marriage certificate showing I married 3 years after inheriting. Several minutes passed in silence. The only sound was the rustling of pages. Mark stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Samantha whispered something in his ear, but he didn't respond. Mr. Harrison shuffled his own papers, as if looking for something that could help. Finally, the judge looked up. Her expression was clear. Mr. Harrison, these documents prove without a shadow of a doubt that the property in question is the separate property of Mrs. Davis. It was acquired by inheritance before her marriage. According to the Civil Code, assets inherited or received as gifts before marriage are not subject to division while the owner is alive. Your client has no legal right to this property at this time. Mark's lawyer tried to speak. But, Your Honor, eventually, the judge cut him off firmly. Eventually, when Mrs. Davis passes away, your son will inherit as appropriate, but that is not the case now. The lawsuit you filed lacks legal standing. You should have investigated the origin of the property before proceeding. Mark shot up from his chair. But my lawyer told me I had a right. He told me the law was on my side. The judge looked at him sternly. Mr. Davis, your lawyer was wrong, or he did not do his job correctly. The law is very clear in these cases. Assets inherited before marriage are the exclusive property of the recipient. Your mother is under no legal obligation to share or transfer this property. I watched as Mark's face changed. The confidence crumbled. The arrogance turned to confusion. The certainty morphed into disbelief. Samantha had gone pale. Her plans, her dreams, everything she had imagined with the money from my house, it was all collapsing right then. Judge Wallace closed the folder of documents with a firm movement. The sound echoed in the room like a final verdict. She looked directly at Mark, and her expression showed no sympathy. Mr. Davis, I want you to understand something very important. You attempted to strip your mother of her property based on incorrect information. This is not only legally improper, but morally questionable. Your mother has every right to live in her house for as long as she chooses. And you have no authority to pressure her in this way. The judge's words fell on Mark like stones. I saw him shrink slightly in his chair. His face had lost all its color. Samantha was beside him, completely still, her hands clenched in her lap. Mr. Harrison tried to intervene one last time, his voice less confident than before. Your Honor, my client acted in good faith. He simply— The judge held up a hand, stopping him. Counselor, your client hired your professional services. You had an obligation to investigate the facts before filing a baseless lawsuit. This could have been avoided with a simple review of the property documents. I hope you take this as a lesson for future cases. The lawyer hung his head. It was obvious he knew he had made a grave error, an error that now exposed him in front of a judge and would likely affect his professional reputation. Judge Wallace turned her attention to me. Her expression softened slightly. Mrs. Davis, I am sorry you had to go through this situation. It is painful when family conflicts reach legal proceedings. But I want you to know that the law is on your side. This property is yours. No one can force you to transfer, sell, or share it unless you wish to. Thank you, Your Honor. My voice was calm. There was no triumph in it, no revenge, just relief. The judge picked up her gavel and struck the bench. Therefore, this court finds the lawsuit filed by Mr. Mark Davis against Mrs. Eleanor Davis to be invalid. The case is dismissed. You may leave. That final strike of the gavel was like thunder in the room. Mark remained frozen in his chair. His eyes were fixed on the judge, as if he couldn't process what he had just heard, as if he expected her to say it had all been a mistake. But there was no mistake, no second chance. The judge was already organizing her documents for the next case. For her, this was over. It was just one more case on her docket. But for us, it was the breaking point of a family relationship. Mr. Jenkins stood up and helped me to my feet. He squeezed my shoulder gently. It all went well, Mrs. Davis. Let's go. We walked toward the courtroom exit. As we passed the table where Mark and Samantha were, I felt my son's gaze on me. I stopped for a moment and looked at him. Our eyes met. And in that instant, I saw something I hadn't seen before. I saw fear. I saw shame. I saw the realization of what he had done. But I said nothing. There was nothing to say. Words were unnecessary after what had happened. I left the courtroom with Mr. Jenkins. We walked down the long courthouse hallway. We went down the stairs. And when we stepped out onto the street, I felt the fresh air on my face like a blessing. Congratulations, Mrs. Davis. Justice was served. Arthur Jenkins shook my hand with genuine respect. I thanked him for his work, and we said goodbye. He had other cases to attend to. I had a life to return to. I took a taxi back home. During the ride, I looked out the window in silence. The streets passed before my eyes, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought about Mark, about the boy he had been, about the man he had become. Where had I gone wrong? At what point had I raised someone capable of trying to strip me of my home? Those questions hurt me more than the entire legal process. When I got to my house, I went inside and closed the door behind me. The silence welcomed me, but this time it wasn't a heavy silence. It was a silence of peace, of closure. I sat in the kitchen and made tea. I looked around my home, the walls I had painted years ago, the furniture I had chosen with care, the photographs on the shelves. Everything was still mine. Everything was still in its place. But something had changed forever. The relationship with my son. That couldn't be repaired with a court verdict. That was broken in a much deeper way. That afternoon, Carol came to visit. She brought a cake she had baked to celebrate. Eleanor, I am so proud of you. You stood firm. You didn't let them intimidate you. We sat in the kitchen and shared the cake with coffee. I told her every detail of the hearing, how Mark had reacted, the look on the lawyer's face when the judge explained his mistake, how Samantha had been struck dumb with shock. Carol listened intently, nodding now and then. They thought they could take advantage of you because of your age. They thought you were an elderly woman without resources or knowledge. But you showed them they were very wrong. Yes, but I don't feel happy, Carol. I feel sad. He's my son. He's the person I raised. And now I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at him the same way again. My friend took my hand across the table. A mother's love is strong, Eleanor. But you also have a right to feel pain. What he did was unforgivable. He tried to take your home. He tried to leave you with nothing. You don't do that. Especially not to a mother who gave him everything. She was right. I knew it. But a mother's heart doesn't understand reason. A mother's heart just hurts. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Mark and Samantha were facing their own reality. They arrived at their apartment in silence. Samantha threw her purse onto the sofa in frustration. Mark remained standing in the middle of the living room, as if lost. I can't believe we lost. The lawyer assured me we had the case won. His voice trembled between rage and disbelief. Samantha spun toward him, her eyes shining with fury. We spent $2,000 on that useless lawyer. $2,000 we didn't have. And for what? To be humiliated in front of a judge. To have your mother see us for what we are. A couple of failures who tried to rob her. We weren't robbing her. It was my right. Mark was trying to convince himself more than her. You're right. You're right. You had no right, Mark. The lawyer didn't even investigate properly. And you believed him because you wanted to believe him. Because you wanted that easy money. Because you thought your mother was a foolish old woman who would just give in. Samantha's words were like lashes. Each one left a mark. Mark sank onto the sofa and covered his face with his hands. What am I going to do now? I told everyone we were going to sell the house. I told the owner of the retail space we were about to close the deal. I made plans. I spent money I didn't have, assuming this would work. Samantha looked at him with a mixture of contempt and disappointment. Well, now you'll have to explain to them that you were wrong. That your brilliant plan didn't work. That your mother turned out to be smarter than you. She stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door. Mark was left alone in the living room. The silence of his apartment was very different from the silence of my house. His was filled with failure, with shame, with consequences. The following days were strange for me. I returned to my usual routine, cooking, cleaning, watering the plants. But there was something different in the air, a feeling that one chapter had ended and another was beginning. Mark didn't visit again. He didn't call. He didn't send messages. It was as if he had disappeared from my life. And although part of me missed my son, another part was grateful for the distance. I needed time to heal, to process everything that had happened. Carol continued to visit me regularly. We drank tea. We talked about simple things. She never mentioned the hearing unless I brought it up. She respected my need to move on. One afternoon, while watering the flowers in the yard, I thought about everything that had happened. How it had started with documents on a table and ended in a courtroom. How my son had tried to strip me of what was mine. How justice had prevailed. But I also thought about the price of that justice. The broken relationship. The lost trust. The love that now had deep cracks. It was worth it, I repeated to myself. It was worth it to defend what was mine. It was worth it not to give in to the pressure. It was worth it to prove that a 69-year-old woman is not an easy victim. But it hurt. Despite everything, it hurt. 3 weeks passed after the hearing. 3 weeks of silence from Mark. 3 weeks in which I continued my life with a calm that surprised even Carol. She came to visit me every couple of days and always asked how I was feeling. I answered her honestly. I felt at peace. Sad, yes, but at peace. One Saturday morning, while I was having coffee in the kitchen, the doorbell rang. I got up calmly and went to open it. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I was met with a surprise I hadn't anticipated. It was Samantha, alone, without Mark. Her face was swollen, as if she had been crying recently. Her eyes were red, and she had an expression of desperation I had never seen on her before. "Eleanor, I need to talk to you. Please." Her voice was different. It no longer had that arrogance. It no longer had that false confidence. It was the voice of someone on the verge of something. I hesitated for a moment, but finally, I stepped aside and let her in. We walked to the living room. She sat on the edge of the sofa, nervous, wringing her hands in her lap. I sat in my armchair and waited for her to speak. I don't know where to start. Samantha was looking at the floor. She couldn't meet my gaze. Everything fell apart after the hearing. Everything. Mark and I. We're not together anymore. We separated a week ago. Those words took me by surprise. I didn't expect that, but I said nothing. I just waited for her to continue. After we lost the case, Mark changed. He became distant, bitter. He would spend hours in silence. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to do anything. And I was furious. Furious that we had spent money we didn't have on a lawyer who turned out to be incompetent. Furious that we had made plans that were never going to happen. Furious that we ended up looking like fools. She paused for a moment. She took a deep breath before continuing. We started fighting. Every day. About everything. I blamed him for being so naive. He told me I had pressured him, that it had all been my idea, that I was the one who wanted the money, and he was right. I wanted that money. I dreamed about that house. I was the one who convinced him to pressure you. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. She wiped them away with the back of her hand, but they kept falling. I lost my marriage because of greed, Eleanor. Because I wanted something that wasn't ours. Because I thought we had a right to your house just because Mark was your son. And now I'm left with nothing. No husband, no house, no future. I looked at her in silence. There was something genuine in her pain, something real I hadn't seen before. But still, I didn't feel pity. I felt a distant sadness, like when you see someone suffer who chose their own path. Why did you come to tell me this, Samantha? She looked up. Her swollen eyes met mine with desperation. Because I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry I treated you as if you didn't matter. I'm sorry I planned to take your home. I'm sorry I was so selfish. And I need you to talk to Mark. I need you to tell him there's still a chance to fix things. Between you two. Not between him and me. That's over. But between a mother and son. I shook my head slowly. That's something Mark has to decide for himself. I can't force him to come. I can't force him to apologize. And frankly, Samantha, I don't know if I'm ready to forgive. But he's your son. And he tried to take my house. He tried to leave me with nothing. He used my age as an argument against me. He treated me like I was an obstacle in his path to money. That's not easily forgotten. My voice was firm, but not cruel. Just honest. Samantha lowered her head again. She stood up slowly. I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. And that Mark is sorry too. Even if he doesn't have the courage to come and tell you. She walked to the door. I walked with her. Before leaving, she turned to me one last time. You were better to us than we deserved, Eleanor. I hope one day you can find peace. She left. I watched her walk away down the street, her shoulders slumped, her steps slow. A woman who had lost everything to ambition, to wanting what wasn't hers. I closed the door and went back to my kitchen. My coffee had gone cold. I made a new cup and sat by the window. I thought about what Samantha had said, that Mark was sorry but didn't have the courage to say it. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to think that my son felt remorse, that he had learned something from all this. But another part of me doubted whether the regret was genuine or just the pain of failure. That afternoon I called Carol and told her about Samantha's visit. My friend listened to everything attentively. And how do you feel after that conversation? I don't know. Confused, I guess. Part of me wants to believe there's hope. That Mark can change. That we can repair what was broken. But another part of me knows some things can't be repaired. Some wounds are too deep. Carol sighed on the other end of the line. Only you can decide if you want to give him another chance, Eleanor. But don't do it out of obligation. Don't do it because you're his mother and you feel you have to. Do it only if you truly believe he has changed. And if you're not sure, it's okay to wait. It's okay to protect yourself. Her words gave me clarity. She was right. I didn't have to rush to forgive. I didn't have to pretend everything was fine. I had a right to my pain. I had a right to my time. The days passed. Spring was arriving, and the plants in my yard were beginning to bloom. I spent my afternoons there, watering the flowers, pruning the dry branches, enjoying the Sunday. There was a strange peace in that routine, a feeling that life went on despite everything. One afternoon, while I was in the yard, I heard someone knock on the door. I went to open it, my hands still dirty with soil. When I opened it, my heart skipped a beat. It was Mark. He was standing on the porch, hands in his pockets, gaze lowered. He looked thinner than the last time. He had dark circles under his eyes and a gaunt face. It was clear he hadn't been sleeping well. "Hi, Mom." His voice was barely a whisper. There was shame in every word. We stood in silence for a moment. I didn't know what to say. He didn't seem to know how to start either. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. He entered slowly, as if afraid I would change my mind. We walked to the living room. I sat in my armchair. He remained standing, too nervous to sit. "Samantha came to see you, didn't she?" I nodded. "Yes. A few days ago." He nodded too. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "We broke up. Her and I. Everything fell apart after the hearing. We lost the money we paid the lawyer. We lost the plans we had. And when there was nothing left to lose, we lost each other." He paused. He took a deep breath before continuing. "Mom, I came to ask for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve for you to listen to me. I know I did something unforgivable. I tried to take your house. I tried to take advantage of you. I treated you like you didn't matter. And all for money, for greed, for wanting a life I hadn't earned." His voice broke. I saw his eyes well up. "I was a horrible son. I forgot everything you did for me. I forgot how you raised me alone after Dad died. I forgot all the sacrifices you made to give me a good life. And I repaid you with betrayal." Tears began to fall down his face, but he did nothing to hide them. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry, that I regret every word, every action, every moment I made you feel like you weren't important." I watched him in silence. I saw the adult man crying in front of me, but I also saw the boy he had been, the boy who hugged me when he was scared, the boy who told me he loved me before bed. And in that moment, something inside me began to soften. It wasn't complete forgiveness. It wasn't forgetting, but it was the beginning of something. A small crack in the wall of pain I had built. Mark was still standing in front of me, tears rolling down his face. I remained seated in my armchair, watching him. There were so many emotions inside me at that moment. Pain, disappointment, but also something softer. Something that resembled compassion. "Sit down, Mark." My voice was calm. He hesitated for a moment, as if unsure he had heard me right. Finally, he sat on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped between his knees, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I need you to understand something. What you did hurt me deeply, not just because of the house. The house is just a place. It hurt me because you came to me with legal documents instead of coming with love. Because you saw me as an obstacle instead of seeing me as your mother. Because you forgot that I gave you life." Mark nodded without looking up. His shoulders trembled slightly. "I know, Mom. I know, and I have no excuse. I let greed blind me. I let Samantha convince me that we were entitled to something that wasn't ours. But the blame is mine. I made the decisions. I was the one who pressured you. I was the one who hired that lawyer without even researching if he was right." He paused. He wiped the tears with the back of his hand. "When the judge explained that the house was yours from before the marriage, I felt like my world was collapsing. Not just because I lost the case, but because I realized what I had tried to do. I tried to take what your parents left you. What was your inheritance? Your security. And all for money I didn't even really need. Why did you do it then, Mark? Why, if you didn't need it?" He looked up for the first time. His eyes were red and swollen. "Because I wanted more. I always wanted more. I was never satisfied with what I had. I saw other people with businesses, with big houses, with money, and I felt I deserved the same. And when Samantha started talking about your property, about what this house was worth, about what we could do with that money, I let that idea consume me." He covered his face with his hands. "I was a fool, a selfish fool who forgot where he came from. who forgot, who sacrificed everything for him. The silence that followed was long, heavy, but not hostile. I needed to process his words. I needed to decide if they were genuine or if they were just the result of him losing everything. Mark, forgiveness isn't something I can give you today. I can't tell you that everything is fine and that we're back to how we were, because it's not true. What happened changed something between us, something that will take a long time to repair, if it can be repaired. He nodded, his head bowed. I understand. I didn't come here expecting you to forgive me. I just came to tell you the truth, to admit what I did, and to ask that, if one day you can forgive me, you do it. Not for me, but for you. So you can live in peace. There was something in those words that touched me, because he was right. Forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me, to free myself from the weight of resentment, from the pain that was eating me up inside. I'm going to need time, Mark. Time to heal. Time to understand everything that happened. Time to decide if I want you to be a part of my life again. He looked up. His eyes showed hope mixed with fear. I understand. I'll respect your time. I won't pressure you. I won't show up unannounced. I just want you to know that if you ever decide to give me another chance, I will show you that I can be better, that I can be the son you deserve to have. He stood up slowly. He walked to the door. I walked with him. Before leaving, he turned to me one last time. I love you, Mom. I've always loved you, even when I didn't show it. Even when I did everything wrong, I'll always love you. He closed the door gently behind him. I stood in the doorway, looking at the dark wood of the door. I felt something damp on my cheeks and realized I was crying. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of having said what I needed to say, of having heard what I needed to hear. I went back to my kitchen. I sat by the window and looked out at the yard. The flowers were still there. The sun was still shining. Life was going on, despite the pain, despite everything. The following days were quieter. Mark didn't show up again. But he sent me a brief message a week later. It just said, "Thinking of you, Mom. I hope you're doing well." I didn't reply right away. I let the message sit there for several days. Finally, one afternoon, I wrote back, "I'm doing well. Thank you for asking." It was short, but it was a start. Carol noticed the change in me. She mentioned it one afternoon while we were having tea in my kitchen. "You look lighter, Eleanor. Like a weight has been lifted." I smiled slightly. Mark came to see me. He came to apologize. I don't know if it was genuine or if it was just because he lost everything, but something in me softened when I heard him. "And what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to see if his actions match his words. Because words are easy, Carol. The hard part is really changing." My friend nodded wisely. "That's the smartest thing you can do. Don't rush. Let time show you the truth." The weeks passed. Spring fully set in. My yard was filled with colors, with scents, with life. I spent my mornings there, enjoying the sun, feeling how peace was slowly returning to my life. Mark sent me occasional messages, never asking for anything, just asking how I was, sharing little things about his day. He told me he had found a new job, that he was living alone in a small apartment, that he was trying to get his life in order. I replied briefly. But I replied, because despite everything, he was still my son, and part of me wanted to believe he could change, that he could learn from his mistakes. One afternoon, 2 months after the hearing, Mark asked if he could visit me. This time he did it correctly, he asked. He waited for my answer. He didn't take anything for granted. I told him yes. He arrived at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He brought flowers, a simple bouquet of white daisies, my favorites. He hadn't brought them in years, but he remembered. "For you, Mom, for your garden." I took the flowers and smelled them. There was something different about him, something more humble, more genuine. "Thank you, Mark." We spent the afternoon talking. Nothing deep, nothing painful, just simple things. He told me about his new job at an accounting firm. I told him about the new plants I had planted. It was strange, like getting to know each other again, like starting from scratch. Before he left, He looked at me seriously. I know I still have a lot to prove. I know words aren't enough. But I'm going to try, Mom. I'm going to be better. Because what hurts me most about all this isn't losing the case. It's losing you. His words hit me hard. I didn't answer. I just nodded. Because I still wasn't ready for more. But it was a step. A small step towards something that might, one day, resemble forgiveness. When he left, I sat in my yard with the daisies in a vase next to me. I looked at the sky, which was turning orange with the sunset. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something like hope. I didn't know if Mark would truly change. I didn't know if our relationship would ever be repaired. But I knew I had done the right thing. I had defended what was mine. I had maintained my dignity. I had shown that a 69-year-old woman was not weak. She was not an easy victim. And that, no matter what happened next, was worth everything. The months that followed were a slow reconstruction. Mark continued to visit me every 2 weeks. He always asked first. He always arrived at the agreed-upon time. He always brought something small, freshly baked bread. Some fruit from the market, flowers for the garden, never anything extravagant. Just simple gestures that showed he was thinking of me. I received him with courtesy, still with caution. Because deep wounds don't heal overnight. And what he had done had left scars that still hurt when I touched them. But there was something different about him. I saw it in his eyes. In the way he spoke to me. The arrogance he used to have was gone. That sense of superiority was gone. There was humility. There was genuine respect. One summer afternoon, as we were drinking lemonade in the yard, Mark told me something I didn't expect. Mom, I started going to therapy. 2 months ago. I looked up, surprised. He was looking at his glass, turning it in his hands. I needed to understand why I did what I did. Why I was capable of trying to take your house. Why money became more important than you. And I discovered things about myself that I don't like. But that I need to change. He continued speaking in a calm voice. The therapist helped me see that I've always had this need to prove something, to be more. To have more, I think it comes from when Dad died. I felt like I had lost something I would never get back. And I tried to fill that void with material things, with success, with money, but it was never enough. He paused. He looked me directly in the eyes. And in that process, I forgot the most important thing. I forgot that you were there, that you were always there, that you sacrificed everything for me, and I treated you as if you were worthless. His words moved me, not because they were perfect, but because they were honest, because they came from a place of true reflection. I'm glad you're working on yourself, Mark. That's something no one can do for you. Only you can decide what kind of man you want to be. I know, and I want to be someone who makes you proud, even if it takes time, even if it's hard. I nodded in silence. And for the first time since the hearing, I felt that maybe there was hope. Maybe it was possible to rebuild what had been broken. While Mark was working on his personal redemption, I was also doing my own internal work. Carol had suggested I write about what I had lived through, that I put my emotions on paper, my pain, my healing process. At first, it seemed strange. I had never been one to write. But one night, after Mark left, I took an old notebook I had saved and started to write. I wrote about the day he arrived with the documents, about the humiliation I felt when he treated me like an old woman who didn't matter, about the fear of losing my home, about the strength I found in myself. And as I wrote, something began to release inside me. The weight became lighter. The pain became more manageable. The words on the paper were like a silent witness to my truth. One afternoon, while I was in the garden, I received an unexpected call. It was Samantha. I hadn't heard from her since her visit months ago. Her voice sounded different, more mature, more serene. Eleanor, I know I have no right to call you, but I wanted you to know that I'm leaving the city. I got a job in another state. A new beginning. She paused before continuing. I wanted to thank you for not holding more of a grudge against me than necessary. When I came to see you that day, I expected you to slam the door in my face. But you listened to me. And that meant more than you can imagine. I wished her luck sincerely. There was no hatred in my heart for her, just a lesson learned about human nature. about how greed can transform people into unrecognizable versions of themselves. When summer ended, something changed between Mark and me. It wasn't a specific moment, it was gradual, like the changing of the seasons. The conversations became deeper, the visits more natural, the tension slowly began to dissolve. One evening, as I was making dinner, Mark came into the kitchen. "Can I help you, Mom?" Those simple words stopped me. It had been years since he had helped me with anything in this house. He had always been the one who arrived, ate, and left. But now he was there, offering to help without me asking. "You can chop the vegetables." We worked side by side in silence, just the sound of knives against the cutting boards. And there was something healing in that simplicity, in sharing a space, in doing something together, without unnecessary words. After dinner, as we were clearing the dishes, Mark spoke. "You know, Mom, I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately, about what he was like, about how he took care of me, and I realized he never taught me to value material things. On the contrary, he always said the most important thing was family, love, honesty." He stopped, a plate in his hands. And I forgot all of that. I forgot his teachings. I forgot what really matters. But I don't want to keep forgetting. I want to honor his memory by being better, by being the man he would have wanted me to be. I felt my eyes well up. My husband had been a good man, an honorable man who worked until his last day to give us a good life. And Mark was right. He would have been disappointed by what his son had done, but he also would have been proud to see him acknowledge his mistakes. Your father would have told you that we all make mistakes, but the important thing is to learn from them. And you are learning, Mark. I can see it. He nodded, his eyes shining. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Mom. Thank you for giving me the chance to show you I can change." That night, after Mark left, I sat in my favorite armchair with a cup of tea. I looked around my house, the walls I knew by heart, the furniture I had chosen with care over the years, the photographs that told the story of my life. This house had almost been taken from me. It had been at the center of a legal battle. It had been the cause of a family rift. But now, it was becoming what it should have always been. A home, a place of peace, a refuge, and I was becoming who I had always been. Not a victim, not a helpless old woman, but a strong woman, a woman who knew how to defend what was hers, a woman who could forgive without forgetting, who could give second chances without being naive. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. And slowly, very slowly, the relationship between Mark and me began to heal. It didn't go back to how it was. It would never go back to how it was. But it became something new, something more honest, something built on a stronger foundation than simple family obligation. Mark started coming over on Sundays to help me with household chores. He fixed what was broken. He painted what needed painting. He cut the grass in the yard. And while he worked, we talked. About life. About his mistakes. About my fears. About our hopes for the future. One afternoon, while he was pruning the bushes in the yard, he asked me something that took me by surprise. "Mom, when I was a kid, was I happy?" I remember I was. But at some point, I stopped being. And I don't know when it happened exactly. I just know I started wanting things instead of wanting moments. "When do you think I got lost?" I thought for a moment before answering. "I think you got lost when you started comparing yourself to others. When you stopped being grateful for what you had and started focusing on what you lacked. When success became more important than peace." He nodded slowly, processing my words. "You're right, and now I'm trying to find myself again. To go back to being who I was before everything got complicated." I smiled slightly. "It's not about going back to who you were. It's about becoming who you want to be. And that's something only you can decide." A full year passed since that day in the courthouse. A year in which everything changed. A year in which I learned that justice doesn't always come with immediate satisfaction, but with a long, painful process of healing. It was an autumn afternoon when Mark arrived at my house with something different in his hands. It wasn't flowers. It wasn't food. It was a small wooden box, hand-carved with delicate details. "What is this?" He placed it on the dining room table carefully. "Something I made for you. I've been taking woodworking classes for the last few months, and I wanted to make something with my own hands. Something to show you that I'm really changing." I opened the box curiously. Inside was a picture frame, also made of wood, and in the frame was an old photograph I thought was lost. It was a picture of Mark when he was 5 years old, sitting on his father's lap, both of them smiling at the camera. "Where did you find this picture?" "It was in a box of Dad's things you had stored in the attic. You asked me to go up and get some tools a few months ago, and I found it. I thought you'd like to have it in a special place." My eyes filled with tears. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of seeing my son remember where he came from, of him honoring his father's memory in a meaningful way. "It's beautiful, Mark. Thank you." He smiled shyly. "I want you to know that every day I'm working to be better. Not just for you, but for me. Because I realized I can't live being someone I don't respect. And for a long time, I didn't respect myself." We sat in the living room and talked for hours. He told me about his therapy, about the things he was discovering about himself, about how he had learned to value what was genuine, what was real. He also told me about his job. He had been promoted recently, not out of excessive ambition, but through honest effort, and he told me he was saving money, not to buy a big house or open a business, but to have stability, to feel secure without relying on unrealistic expectations. "And there's something else I want to tell you, Mom." His tone became more serious. "When all this happened, when I lost the hearing and I lost Samantha, I thought my life was over. I thought I would never recover from the shame, from the failure. But now I understand it was the best thing that could have happened to me, because it forced me to look in the mirror, to see who I had become, and to decide to change." He paused and took my hand. "And the most important thing I got back wasn't dignity or self-respect. It was you. I got my mother back, and I'm never going to lose you again." I squeezed his hand gently. I had waited so long to hear those words, to feel that they were true. And now that I heard them, I knew they were. The following months were the calmest I had lived in a long time. Mark continued to visit me regularly, but now our conversations were different. There was no tension, no awkward silences, just a real connection between a mother and son. Carol noticed the change. She told me one afternoon, as we had coffee at her house, "You look different, Eleanor. Lighter, more at peace." I smiled. "I think I'm finally healing. It doesn't mean I've forgotten what happened, but it means I'm not letting it define me anymore. I'm not letting the pain consume me." My friend nodded wisely. "That's true forgiveness. Not forgetting but letting go. Not erasing the past, but not letting it drag you down." She was right. Forgiveness hadn't been instant. It hadn't been easy. It had taken time, tears, difficult conversations. But it had been worth it, because now I could look at my son without resentment. I could remember what happened without it hurting me to my core. One spring afternoon, exactly a year and a half after the hearing, Mark invited me to walk in the park downtown. We hadn't gone to that place together in years. When he was a boy, I used to take him there every Sunday. He would run among the trees while I watched him from a bench. Simpler times. Happier times. We walked slowly along the tree-lined paths. The sun filtered through the leaves, creating patterns of light on the ground. There were families enjoying the good weather. Children playing. Elderly couples holding hands. Mark stopped in front of a large tree. It was the same tree where we used to sit when he was little. "Do you remember this place, Mom?" "How could I forget? We spent many afternoons here. You would ask me to tell you stories, and I would make up tales about dragons and princesses." He smiled nostalgically. "And I believed every word. Because to me, you were magic. You were the most important person in the world." His voice broke slightly. "At some point, I stopped seeing you like that. I stopped valuing you, and I turned you into someone I could take advantage of. But now, after everything that happened, I see you again as I saw you then, as someone magic, as the most important person in my world." He hugged me, and in that hug, I felt everything that words couldn't express. I felt his genuine regret, his recovered love, his gratitude for a second chance. We sat under the tree as we did years ago, and we talked about life, about what we had learned, about what we still had left to learn. You know, Mom, the other day I was thinking about the hearing, about how the judge put me in my place. And I realized that day I didn't just lose a legal case. I lost the illusion that I could get things without effort, that I deserved something just for existing. It was humiliating, but necessary. Humility is a harsh teacher, but an effective one. He felt it, and you were my teacher too, because you could have sought revenge. You could have closed the door on me forever, but you didn't. You gave me space to grow, to change. And that's something I'll never forget. When the sun began to set, we walked back home. Mark walked me to the door, and before leaving, he hugged me again. I love you, Mom, and thank you for everything, for raising me, for defending what was yours, for teaching me the most important lesson of my life, for forgiving me when I didn't deserve it. I love you too, Son. I watched him walk down the street until he disappeared around the corner. I went into my house and closed the door gently. I looked around. Everything was in its place. Everything was still mine. My home, my refuge, my inheritance. I sat in my favorite armchair and closed my eyes. I thought about the entire journey, the pain I'd endured, the battles I'd fought, the victories I'd won, and I felt a deep peace, a peace that came from knowing I had done the right thing, that I had defended my dignity without losing my humanity. That night, before sleeping, I wrote one last reflection in my notebook. The words flowed easily, as if they had been waiting to come out for a long time. Today I learned that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it comes in the form of documents that prove your truth. Sometimes it arrives in a courtroom where a wise judge recognizes your right. I learned that a woman's strength isn't in shouting. It's in standing firm when everyone expects you to fold. It's in defending what's yours without apologies. It's in forgiving without forgetting. And I learned that a mother's love is complex. It can be broken. It can be wounded. But it can also heal if both sides are willing to do the work. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. I lay down in my bed, in my house, in my home that no one could take from me, and I slept with the tranquility of someone who knows they did the right thing, of someone who knows their story, though painful, ended with dignity, because in the end, it wasn't just about a house. It was about respect, about justice, about proving that a 69-year-old woman is not invisible. She is not weak. She is not an obstacle to be removed. She is a silent warrior. She has accumulated wisdom. She is serene strength. She is unbreakable dignity. And that is something no one can ever take from you. Not even your own son. Life went on after that. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. Mark continued to visit me. Our relationship continued to heal, and I continued to live in my house, taking care of my garden, enjoying my peace. Because this is my story. The story of a woman who defended what was hers, who stood firm when everyone expected her to fall, who forgave without forgetting, who loved without being naive. And if my story can teach other women anything, it is this. Never let anyone make you feel small. Never let your age be used as a weakness. Never let family be an excuse for abuse. Because you are silent warriors too. You deserve respect too. You deserve justice too. And when the time comes to defend what is yours, do it with your head held high, with documents in hand, with the truth on your side. Because justice, even if it's slow to arrive, always arrives. And when it does, it is sweet. It is healing. It is liberating. This is my story. And now, it is yours too.